Okay. Well, greetings, compadres. For your mystery meat sandwich. Mystery meat? Yes. Bologna, mystery meat sandwich, whatever it is today. It doesn't matter because we're skipping it. We're skipping it like Skippy peanut butter or skipping it like rolling down the street with like a 90s CD player that has the anti skip. We're skipping it. So there you go. Because today we have with us Heidi Lee. And I'm going to unpack a little bit more about who she is. But I want to say that this is actually her second time on the podcast. And so back when I was on the radio station, she was on before, and we talked about codependency. And here is what I have to say about her that's kind of her official bio. Okay. She's an author, she's a singer-songwriter, and a speaker who helps people experience greater emotional freedom. Who doesn't want that, by the way? So, by sharing her relatable experiences, insightful mentorship, and compassionately guided body-mind bridge sessions, she creates a safe space to be real and gently step into healing. She's the author of Confessions of the Broken, a codependent rock chick's journey from hopelessness to healing, which is PS like the best title ever. And she is a co-author of the Epiphanies Project, hyphen, along with yours truly, hyphen. She is the founder of the Emotional Freedom Masterclass, and she is certified as a BodyMind Bridge practitioner and a life coach. I mean, she's got all the things. I love it. You can find out all about her on her website. It's HeidiLeeMusic.com. So it's HeidiLeeMusic.com. And so, all that to say, this is just going to sort of launch us like a cannonball into a swimming pool, into the chaplain's chat. So, this is kind of like the main event right here. And so, this is how the idea for this conversation came about. A couple months ago, I was scrolling through the social medias and the interwebs. And I love, by the way, I love following Heidi because Heidi, I count her as a friend who I really admire. And whenever I read her stuff, see her stuff on social media, she brings a positivity that, like, I don't know, I just don't see very often. She's got a heart of gold. She's got a special spirit in her that I'm just really touched by. She basically has got this illumination from the inside that just kind of radiates to everything she does, and it comes through on her social media. And so, anyway, I appreciate Heidi being here, but I want to say that what struck me that day when I was scrolling through and I saw this on her social media, she was talking about forgiveness. And I'm going to be paraphrasing here because I tried to look for the post later, I couldn't find it. But basically, she was talking about forgiveness and how once we've done the work of forgiveness, a lot of us have done some emotional work around the topic of forgiveness. And once we've kind of done that and felt like we've had some freedom around that, sometimes, at least for me, what will happen is I'll get triggered. Something will happen. Somebody will walk in the room. Maybe I, get an email or something, and it just creates this bodily response, almost like I'll get tense. I'll feel my anxiety start to rise, and I'll notice I know exactly what it is, right? It's like this trigger of, yep. And my body just kind of, it's like the pain body thing where all of a sudden my body has remembered, oh, yeah, that person or whatever it is, that situation, that instance. And I'll get sort of tense. And so when I read that on her social media that she was going to be talking about that or exploring the idea of forgiveness, and I just got tickled pink. And so that was like a huge lead up to say, Heidi, welcome. Thank you so much for talking with me tonight.
Yes, thank you. And gosh, what a kind intro. I'm going to be listening back to that just for my own encouragement.
Oh,
Thank you.
good.
Yeah, so good to be here.
Yay. Okay. Well, okay, so to start off with, I just want to share that I'm in the 12-step program, a 12-step program, and there are many different ways to get sober, but that's what worked for me personally. And in that 12-step fellowship, it's something called the sick man's prayer or the resentment prayer. And so what it is kind of this hey, if there's somebody who you resent and you've done a fourth step already around and you've looked at your part, but you still kind of have issues with this person, pray for them for 2 weeks. I don't know where the 2 week formula came from, this magic mythical 2 weeks. And then um just ask for whatever it is that you want for yourself. Ask for them that they would be blessed with this stuff. And it sounds super lovely. And I have tried it before multiple times on one individual. And it's funny. I just don't personally receive a lot of freedom from doing that. Um, but I will say that what I tend to do, which I know is kind of toxic also. So sorry, there's a question in here I'm getting to. But what will happen for me is I'll slip into kind of a shame-based, like, "Well, you should be over this." And so I'm just wondering, you know, after people saw your social media post and after you started digesting some of this, what are your thoughts on, how we can deal with triggers and lead us eventually get us to be to a greater level of freedom in our ability to forgive.
Yeah, so big question, right? And so, yes, the reason I put it out on social is I have this class called the Emotional Freedom Masterclass, and it's this really small little group of people that are like just so in it to win it on not being stuck. Like wherever we tend to get stuck in our emotional freedom, in our codependency recovery, in our recovery from whatever, these folks are like, man, I'm on the journey and I want to keep walking. So this topic of forgiveness came up in the class and I thought, whoa, like that's way too big for me to just sort of like tackle and even like pull from maybe resources that I have in the past, some 12-step stuff or some, faith based stuff or just other things I've read. It felt like what I had already at my disposal, like you're saying, sort of felt incomplete. Like, gosh, that seems like a great idea to pray that prayer, but man, it doesn't seem like it has those things have always stuck, right? So that's why I threw it out there to social media because I figured like, okay, everybody probably the old metaphor of we all have a different part of the elephant that we're hanging on to, right?
Mhm.
So if I can put all these pieces together, maybe that folks send me, maybe that'll help me get a more rounded idea of this, what forgiveness is, the process of it. Why doesn't it feel like it always sort of works or sticks? And so, we came together in our class and for over a month, actually, we're still talking about it. People just like pooled all their forgiveness sort of resources. And so what I'm going to be sharing really comes from like I've just been marinating in this for like the last, month or so and just like lots of different resources. I mean, podcasts and TED Talks and all kinds of stuff. So what I'll say is that the common denominator that seemed to be in so many of the resources that we explored was that we often expect forgiveness to be a one-time thing or a
Mhm.
2-week thing if we're going to pray that prayer, right? Or whatever
Mm.
that process is. We expect it to kind of like that one-time process sort of thing. But the common denominator we found in all these resources was that's really not true a lot of the times that forgiveness is a process and it's okay. Like, then we can bring in that self-compassion piece that it's okay if we have to choose to forgive again and choose again and choose again. And also know that sometimes our feelings will follow. Like we'll make that choice
Mhm.
to forgive. We pray for that person for the 2 weeks or whatever that discipline is around forgiveness or that practice. And maybe our feelings follow and we actually have warm feelings and we want good things for that person. And sometimes maybe the feelings don't follow, but we're still making the choice to forgive, which kind of brings me to, even in making the choice to forgive, like what does that mean? I think so. So one thing that I realized about myself was I maybe didn't have a super clear working definition of forgiveness. Like,
Mm,
what am I actually trying to accomplish? Because maybe we've assigned things to forgive, the idea of, quote, I'm doing air quotes right now,
mhm,
forgiveness, that actually maybe really aren't part of a healthy working definition of forgiveness, or the definition that we want to pursue, right? So a couple of, like,
mhm,
I think, myths that are kind of common are that forgiveness is the same thing as reconciliation, and
mm,
it's not. And I think maybe the fact that our feelings aren't always following, maybe ties into that a little bit, that we don't really have a desire to reconcile with this person. And that's okay, because forgiveness is not the same thing as reconciliation. So that's kind of the first myth that I noticed was coming up a good bit. This one was really good. Um, that we may not ever get, just this truth that we may not ever really get a full sense of closure, and
mhm,
we may be expecting that. So even if the person does apologize, which I know it's a billion times harder for me when the person does not, make an amends, they don't
mhm.
apologize, they don't own it. But even if they do, like best case scenario, even if they do, and are trying to change their behavior and all of that stuff, maybe we still don't actually feel that full sense of like
Mhm.
closure, because maybe we still don't really want that reconciliation with them. And we have to live in that tension of what does it look like to forgive somebody, but not really feel this full sense of closure. Things are not going back to how they used to be. Our feelings haven't totally followed. We're not
Mhm.
desiring reconciliation. That's like a tension to live in. That's pretty
Yes.
messy. And then lastly, on the kind of these things that kind of came up that I realized, oh, I've got to realize, I've got to really think about these when I'm gonna try to define what forgiveness is for myself. Um, that forgiveness and grief can coexist.
Oh, wow.
Um, which to me was like, oh, and that was like a thing that I'm working through right now in a situation in my life, that forgiveness and grief can coexist. And again, that's a really tough tension to live in, I think. But I think that sometimes they have to coexist for us to
Mm,
be healthy. Um, and if I'm not aware of that, I may feel, because I'm still grieving a hurt, a loss from a situation, I may get that confused and feel like, oh, I guess I wasn't really able to forgive if I'm still grieving this. But I don't think that's true. I think that forgiveness and grief can and sometimes really needs to coexist, that we can be grieving our sadness, grieving our loss from whatever that situation was, and then choosing to forgive.
I love this. I love this so much. And, you know, I wonder, I feel like it's so common to mourn a loss, like almost like going through, the stages of grief on what something once was, or
Yes.
even the possibility of what it could have been, right? And then sometimes, just going through that process, and it's like, oh, can sort of tell your brain cognitively, like, but I chose to forgive. What's wrong with me? Why am I not doing this? But, they say about the stages of grief, and they say about grief in general, some losses, right? They never go away. They are relentless, and they may, kind of like present themselves to be kind of like the ocean. They may recede just a little bit from time to time, but it's always there. And I wonder if, part of what keeps us, at a spiritually connected level too is experiencing some of that. And um, you know, like trying to figure out how to take our power back a little bit, um, once we've made that choice to forgive, but then it doesn't kind of look like what we might have thought that it would.
Right. Yes, and, I'm sure, you've heard this, with grief, sometimes we're expecting, we hear the 5 stages of grief, or I think sometimes it's the 7 stages of grief or whatever, but, like, let's say it's 5, I think we kind of expect it to be this linear process
Hmm.
of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then I'm kind of done at the
Yep.
end, but
Check the
that's
box.
yeah, but that's not really the case, and again, it's kind of an unrealistic expectation that we can put on ourselves and then be like, gosh, why am I still so sad about this? Or why does this still, get me on certain days? And it's probably just because we probably went 1, 2, 5, 3, back to 1, 4, 5. Hey, I think I'm done. Just kidding. We're back to 1, and
Yeah.
it's a tangled mess of progress,
Yep.
not a, not a linear thing. So I think when we know that, then we can bring a lot more self-compassion in and help ourselves notice, like you said, the shoulds. I should, gosh, I should have been able to forgive this by now. I mean, I decided to forgive and I worked whatever practice I have around forgiveness and like, what is my deal? But we can kind of take the shoulds away and bring in some self-compassion, instead.
Mhm. Well, I love that. And that was like the perfect lead in to my next question, which was, the reemergence of the triggers, like how to care for ourselves and really tap into that compassion when, because I know for me it almost feels, depending on what it was, the situation, whatever, almost feels as powerful as like a fight or flight, response, just kind of like this, I'm out of control with my feelings, and I'm not going to do anything crazy. But it's hard for me sometimes to, pause and to just go, okay, it's okay for me to feel this way and like talk myself through sometimes. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on how we can care for ourselves when, those things come up and, so that we can get to that place of gentleness.
Yeah, I do think, that idea of practicing the pause is so important. And so if we know that about ourselves, I mean, sometimes we just probably are going to get blindsided and maybe that person who's hurt us is just going to sort of like pop up somewhere and we didn't expect to see them. But often we sort of know what circles that person hangs out in or, when we might see them. Maybe the holidays are coming up and we know we're going to see this difficult family member or this person that we have a strained relationship with, or we are going to a work function and we know we're going to see that person or, whatever. We're going back into this community where we used to spend time and like, oh, maybe they're going to be there. So I think it's wise to not just bebop into those situations and sort of, get blindsided, think about it. Okay, this might be tough. Okay, and like prepare ourselves. And maybe, I did actually come up with kind of my own working definition of forgiveness, for myself. And so maybe if we do that for ourselves, maybe we have that like on our phone, like on in a note on our phone or something.
Mhm.
And when we do run into that person and we feel triggered or maybe we just give ourselves permission to excuse ourselves. Like if it's in person, just excuse ourselves to the restroom and like take the like physically remove ourselves, so that we're not trying to fight through it right in the moment while being triggered, but like actually give ourselves some space to remove ourselves, go in another room, go sit in our car for a second, go stand outside for a minute, go to the
Mhm.
restroom, and, maybe read through if we have a definition of forgiveness for ourselves, maybe read through that and just even give ourselves permission to think, okay, this is where I'd like to be. If we do have a relationship spiritually with God, higher power, maybe we invite them, our higher power, in at that time and say, okay, between you and me, really not feeling this right now. But when I was in a good state, I wrote this definition of forgiveness, and you know my heart, and you know that this is what I'd like to lean into. And I ask that you'll help me.
Mm,
And, even if my feelings aren't there right now, I ask that you'll help me. And then I think that one thing that really helps me is I can spin out a little bit about like, well, how do I even talk to this person? Like if you do have to kind of have a conversation with them, at
mhm.
the Thanksgiving table or whatever. I don't know about you, but I kind of feel this weird tension of like, if I act like everything is okay, then it's like I'm letting them off the hook. But you also don't want to be like snarky
Yeah,
or like, you don't want to be the problem, right?
right.
So there's a word that really helps me in these situations, and it is the word courtesy.
Mm,
So if I just think, what would it look like to treat this person with courtesy? It takes so much pressure off because I don't have to treat them the way things were before when we were best friends or everything was fine or whatever. I don't have to sort of teach them a lesson by giving them
mhm.
the silent treatment. I don't have to be all awkward and weird because I don't know what to do with myself. I can just kind of think, okay, courtesy. Well, I mean, that's like how I would treat any acquaintance, any
Yeah,
stranger, anybody, right? Like I'm going to treat them with courtesy. I don't have to have long engaged conversations with them. But I'm just courteous. Maybe I say, "Hi, you look nice. Nice to see you." And then I go sit across the room because I know it's going to be too much for me to try to like engage, long term or something. So those are a
yeah.
couple things that help me.
I think that is so, so good. I love that courtesy. And, another thing that has helped me, and I'm almost embarrassed, this is far less spiritual of a trick or a tip than you are sharing, but it does work too for me sometimes when I remember to do this. But um, let's say you're at a party or something and somebody starts kind of going off about political views or things that are just kind of like a hot spot or like a hot topic, um, and this works similarly for me too, sometimes in those situations where I'm re-triggered when I've previously felt like, oh, we're good, I forgave, da da da, which is I just try and like turn it over to God, but I think about something else after that. I'm like, oh, okay. So what do I need to put on the grocery list again? Okay, what do I need? And it's like I'm, there and I'm, listening and stuff ish, but not really because I don't want to attach to anything
Mhm.
that that person is saying and then get myself in a space where I'm out of balance and my inner peace vanishes.
Yeah.
And that kind of helps too, which it's like take it or leave it. But
No, it's like a really practical way of detaching, like, and you're
yes,
doing it on purpose, so it's not like an unhealthy thing where you don't even really know that you're doing it you're aware that you're doing it, and it's like a tool in your tool belt you can use when you need to, and it probably also allows you to stand there with courtesy because
yeah,
you're not gonna be reactive, you're not gonna be argumentative, you're not gonna try to fix their thinking because 'cause you're thinking about that you're gonna make pork chops on Wednesday, and what do you need to
right.
buy when you go to the store?
Yes. Well, and it's also a way too of like, letting go of the things that no longer serve me. So, what
Mm.
doesn't serve me anymore is getting in some heated, dumb debate with somebody about something. I don't need that. Like that, it just never serves me well. And
Mhm.
so for me to then make space for the things that do serve me. Oh, you know what does serve me? Thinking about my morning routine tomorrow and, which affirmations might present themselves or which meditation I might do tomorrow. And truly, those distractions of the mind really help me in some of those situations to not cling so hard, but I'll tell you, it depends too, quite honestly, on like my level of physical fatigue, maybe
Mm.
how often I've had to pull out all those tools recently, it's kind of like all those factors come into play too. And, determine my reaction sometimes, even though I have control of myself and I do have the power to choose, sometimes I just feel, yucky. And I think for me, sometimes that's just that point where I just get to tell myself, you know what? You're a human. And of course, you would feel this way, if the way that you perceive this happened to you, or if you were the victim of this or whatever, and just kind of, look at it like, yeah, if I were sitting here telling a friend the history of whatever from their angle, totally, I would just come alongside you and help you, bury the body. So,
Right. Right. So we need to
I
give
think,
ourselves that same level
yeah,
of grace. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. Yes. One thing that I read, and I did not look this up ahead of time. I'm pretty sure it was Pema Chodron. Um, and it was the unwelcoming, no, welcoming the unwelcome book, I think. And there was a little part in there, she was talking about, um, trying to get to compassion for the other person too, and how she suggested doing that. What had worked for her was saying the phrase, just like me. So, in
Mm.
other words, saying, like, oh, see, that person is looking for validation in their beliefs, just like me. Like you would like somebody in your own life, whether it's your partner or whoever, a close friend, or somebody who you would like to have, feel connected to on a heart level or a non-heart level. Maybe it's a political or intellectual level or whatever, but just to bridge that gap by saying, okay, just like me, and to then be able to say, like, okay, so here's both of our humanities, coming out. And, sometimes I think some wounds, it's like there aren't any easy answers, but yet at the same time, everything kind of helps, to, put a little bit of a, hand on our heart, a band-aid on our heart for, the time when we're seeing that person or hearing about that situation and becoming re-triggered. I don't know. But the other thing I wanted to ask you about is actually something I was just thinking about this recently. It's funny the way things work. So, sidebar, Heidi and I originally tried to have this conversation a couple days ago. And then, like, my internet went down. It was all this different stuff. And, it wasn't meant to be on that day. So then yesterday, which was Tuesday, so this is the day after we were supposed to have this conversation and had to reschedule to now. I was having a conversation with somebody on Tuesday, and we were talking about suffering and just, how powerful suffering is, and, how I'm just wondering how you think maybe suffering and forgiveness, um, how are they interrelated? What have you heard? And what would you, in your master class, what would you guys, you know, discuss around this topic?
Wow. I don't know that I've ever thought about those two things side by side before, or, interconnected before. But, I think any kind of suffering or pain gives us the opportunity to, lean into more healing. It's kind of can be a refiner's fire if we
Mm,
allow it to be.
yeah.
And so I would imagine, the process of forgiveness, especially as we've been talking about it, um, with grief being involved,
Mm,
um, with even that, that I loved that what you said about, just like me. Oh, I love that because, and what I hear in that is humility,
Mm,
which is uncomfortable. And I think sometimes in suffering, we experience healthy, not humiliation, but healthy humility,
mm,
as maybe some of our expectations are not met or whatever. And so, or we can't do the things we used to be able to do. Let's say it's a physical suffering,
mm,
and it's humbling to not be able to do what you once used to be able to do because you're in pain now or something.
mhm,
And so, yeah, I can really see how suffering and forgiveness could be aligned, and it's really fascinating, and I'd like to give it more thought. But I've
mhm,
not really thought through that, but I definitely can see how they would be, and how they both certainly can contribute to our character in a really
mm.
deep and meaningful way.
Totally. And I sprung that on you, so I apologize for that. You probably were like, "Wait a second." Um, yeah, and that is so beautiful. I love that. I love the thought of the humility piece, right? Like, because, you know, I don't know. I'll tell you, like the times when I've been in the hospital, it's very humbling, right? To have
Mm,
somebody else help you while you're suffering. And it's just this whole like, are you looking at me? Are you judging me? It's this kind of, yeah, place where you just feel very vulnerable, right? And so um, I wanted to move into self esteem.
mm.
And I was wondering, what do you think about, I feel like some of these things being triggered and re triggered uh, by somebody, a person, place, or thing can really damage our self esteem. And do you find that to be true too? Or,
I think if we can get to that place of realizing that forgiveness is a process and it's messy and that there's no like perfect way to do it, and that if there's some reason that we're getting stuck,
mm,
it's probably a good reason. Like there's probably,
mm,
and we're really trying and we're just feeling stuck. There's probably a really valid reason there. And, I would say a good first place to look is like, is there still something I need to grieve here? Is there, because for me, I have to say an easier emotion to go to is anger
mm-hmm,
or self-righteousness, like, "I would never do that to them, and if I did, I would make amends," and
yeah.
whatever. So it's real easy for me to, get my judgy pants on, and that's easy to just stay in that level of being triggered, but I think the
Yeah.
harder part is to recognize that for me, usually what's under that is sadness. And
Yeah.
sadness feels so much more vulnerable
Yeah.
than anger and self-righteousness. But if I'll allow myself to kind of drop into that, well, then I can have a lot of compassion for myself to see that, like, okay, I really was wounded. I didn't actually take the time, or I just didn't have the awareness around, how I could sort of name some of these ways where I'm wounded, and I haven't healed yet, and that doesn't mean we
Mm,
have to like have a big pity party or, be in a victim mentality or anything like that. But I think there's really room. We need to make room to honor our grief and our hurt and our sadness and the loss that we've experienced. And so I think if we can come at it from that place, then we can have a lot more self-compassion. And then for me, the self-esteem stuff kind of goes away because then I no longer feel like a failure. I'm kind of reparenting myself here,
mm,
being kind to my inner child and saying, well, yeah, of course you're sad. Of course you felt a loss from that.
mm-hmm,
And now what do you need? What resources do you need? Do you need to talk, do I need to talk to a therapist? Do I need to talk to a friend? Do I need to do some 12-step work around that? What do I need to heal? Um, so yeah.
somebody told me once, and I'm probably going to butcher it, but I'm going to give it a whirl. They said
Mhm.
something to the effect of the bully in the room. So whoever the bully is, schoolyard bully, if you will, uh, that person is the one reaching out to be loved. And I just thought that was powerful. Like, and I can totally go there when I'm not emotionally wrapped up in the situation or feeling triggered. And sometimes, like, I'm thinking of a particular person, and sometimes I am like, I mean, your basic Eckhart Tolle with this person. I am like, you know what? I love you. You're one of God's kids. Da, da, da. Like, I'm like, and I'm feeling it. I am feeling like joy illuminating from my heart for this person. And then other times I am like, if I have to see one more time, if I just no, like, no, like I will not be spoken to that way. Like I'll get all, and I think that there's a human element to that for sure, but it's also, um, it causes me to want to run away and not be around that. And so I think what I'm personally searching for, and you touched on this earlier, is with the word courtesy. But it's like what I'm personally searching for is like, you know what? It doesn't have to be hot or cold. It's not these black and white. Like, how about I let it happen. Whatever's going to happen, I let that feeling come, right? And then I just tell myself, like, it's okay. It's okay because I'm human. And, I think there's something to be said for, at least we're trying, and, we're in process. Like, I mean, like you said, it's not linear. And I know most journeys in my life that have had, significance. I mean, I thought, to kind of loop it back to sobriety, I thought when I got sober, when I eventually made it, quote unquote, made it sober for X amount, a couple handful of years, maybe I would never talk about alcohol anymore. And now all I do is talk about alcohol, like in the recovery space, but
Mhm.
still, it's just a funny, that I don't know. We don't know like where the journey will lead and where the path will lead. And I don't know. I think, to care for myself in the process and to care for ourselves, as humans, um, it's a hard place to get to, but so crucial.
Yeah, and I think just being able to look at those triggers as, one of my recovery friends says, more will be revealed.
Hmm.
It just so each time we can really look at those triggers as a gift that hold information for us. Like what else
Yeah.
needs to heal here? What else do I need to grieve? What else do I need to look at? What else do I need to maybe do a little work around my own powerlessness in this situation where,
Mm,
okay, I guess I have been holding on to that I'm going to be able to fix this person or they're going to, things are going to get back to how they used to be or something like that. Where do I need to maybe surrender my
mm,
expectations? So I think, yeah, if we can look at each trigger as a gift, then that's helpful as
mm.
well.
Totally agree. And it's also massively helpful, I found, for myself to just kind of think of it from the space of, all right, why am I expecting somebody else to live inside my version of right and wrong? Maybe, I mean, maybe some things, some situations, it's as simple as, well, they didn't know any different or any better, or they probably weren't thinking of it in that way. I mean, I'll tell you that a lot of times that I make an amends to somebody, like they don't even know what I'm talking about. They can't even remember it, much less did it like affect their life, you know? And I think,
Yes.
sometimes, that's true, is that, my perspective is just maybe, a little bit off, but that experience is real to me. How I perceived it is truth and is real for me. And to, honor that, I think is important. Instead of pushing it down or away or whatever. and, jumping into the shame and the guilt cycle. But one other thing I was thinking about asking you, and this falls in the category of like, didn't really talk about this ahead of time, but um, I have a memory of sitting in treatment. And this was after I'd been through, a couple times in treatment and then came home to do like outpatient.
Mhm.
And I remember, this poor group of people, they had to sit here and listen to me like process, about, this, I'm blaming this person. That's why I'm here is this person and all this stuff. And, kind of day after day, I would at least, kind of touch on that situation. And then finally one day, the counselor said, that person is your guru, and you might not be ready to hear that, but someday you'll understand. And I think about that. Like, that comes up for me every now and again. Like, what is this trying to teach me? What is this feeling touching into, presenting itself? What is it saying? And yeah, I was wondering if you have any experience with that.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of goes back to the whole idea of like every time we do get triggered or we think something is somebody else's fault, they're triggering me, right? Okay, well, what's being revealed? That idea of that they're actually a mirror for me. Like what what
Right.
what actually is this a mirror for? That's actually just showing me what's inside me that is reactive about this, so
Mhm.
attached to whatever it is that they said or didn't say or think or, you know, um, am I attached to some expectation that they would have behaved differently? And, what's in me? And it very may well be that whatever they did or said or didn't say, it was unkind or inappropriate or whatever. And also, maybe
Mhm.
there's something I can at least take that as an opportunity to look at me and see how that's, a mirror. And a similar experience comes to mind that my dad's given me permission to talk about his recovery. And so he's in recovery for alcoholism. And so he's always said like, hey, my story being part of your story can help anybody. So I always like to say that. So
Mhm.
just for anonymity purposes, he's given me freedom to talk about his story along with mine. But I was going to his, I think it was inpatient at that time. I'm not sure, inpatient or outpatient, um, in rehab, like
Mhm.
as the family member, right? And I was just angry. Like every
Mhm.
time I went, I was so resentful, and I just probably sounded gross and toxic and like you know, super blamey and shamey and blah, and had a kind of a similar experience where the counselor really gave me a kick in the pants and was like, you're not here for him. You're here for you. Like
Mm.
you are here to do your own healing. And I didn't get it in the moment, but
Mhm.
wow, and that did sink in, it was like, wow, yes. Every time I've got my finger pointed at somebody else, most likely there's something in me that, I could look at,
Mhm.
that could be healed. In fact, one of my song lyrics is, um, I've been pointing my finger at everybody but me. Like,
Mhm.
and how lonely it is when we do that and how
Mhm.
frustrating it is when we do that. Um, yeah, I wrote the song called Heaven Help Me, and it's basically all about how like I was so tired and so weary and I was running around pointing my finger at everybody else, but like, who was really the
Yep.
common denominator here, me.
Yeah, I can relate. I can relate. There's a yeah, there's a daily, I think it's a daily reflections in some of the 12-step literature that I read. It's a little story and it's talking about the idea of how, I think they use the term spiritual axiom that when I am disturbed, there's something in me that needs, attention. And it's not the, exterior issue that I'm thinking that it is, but it's something, that's going on inside. And the whole example that they use is like I think it's about a barking dog. It's about a neighbor making noise, and I think there's like a barking dog involved. And the example was like, one day I was just so upset about this. Like, don't they know I have work to do? It's so inconsiderate that they've got this dog who barks all the time and la la la. And then the very next day, right? Like the same thing happens, the dog is barking or whatever the example was. And yet it's like, the perspective change has happened. There's like a shift, whatever, maybe, a good night's sleep was had, whatever it was, there's this measure of peace and, grace. And it's like, oh, isn't that lovely? Like one of God's creatures is singing, instead of like this annoying barking dog thing. And it's so fascinating that, the point was it's the same exact scenario, yet two totally different reactions. And I just find that stuff fascinating.
Yes, absolutely. And I think sometimes for me, what is the perspective changer, because it may not be that drastic, like especially coming back to our forgiveness example, it may not be our conversation. It may not be that, one day I'm so triggered. And then the next day, the person I'm like, what? They are just a lovely part of God's creation. Like I may not be that drastic, but
Yeah.
what may help me is like I might own my power more to take care of
Mm,
myself in some way. So even just like with the example of the dog, what came to my mind was I actually sometimes will hear neighborhood noise and feel irritated. And then sometimes I'm in a better spot and I think, what a great idea if I just got my noise canceling headphones and I played my rushing river sound through there, or I played I've got kind of this playlist on Spotify that's very kind of spa music, whatever. And it's just like, and do that. And then I'm good.
yeah.
So it's sometimes I'm not really owning my power to make a choice to make it better because I'm just kind of wallowing in this shouldn't be happening. I shouldn't have to experience this because they're being inconsiderate. And it's probably the same, could be the same thing
Right.
sometimes with folks that we don't forgive or we're struggling to forgive and feeling triggered. Sometimes I might just wallow in that. And like I said, my go-to can be like anger or kind of self-righteousness. And I might just sort of get a weird little high from that and
Mm,
feeling, both of those things can kind of help us to feel superior sometimes. Certainly anger is a good emotion and necessary sometimes. But if we hang out there, like it can be like a superiority thing for me sometimes.
mhm.
Um, but sometimes owning my power is deciding, well, I would have normally gone and sat right next to that person before all this went down. And it's probably going to feel a little awkward to say hi and then go sit somewhere else. But you know what? That's what it's going to take for me to take care of myself
Yep.
in the situation. Or but various boundaries, right? And sometimes those can be really setting boundaries can be so uncomfortable for those of us that are recovering from codependency. Man, boundaries are so hard. But if we can own our power to take care of ourselves in those situations, a lot of times that very thing is what helps us to change our perspective because it creates more space, allows us to let go a bit. We don't feel like victims. We don't feel powerless in a negative way. We've
Mm.
owned our power in a situation to take care of ourselves. So I think that can be a game changer as well.
Heidi, that is like brilliantly said. So, so well said. And it's like, honestly, the perfect wrap up note, too, right? Is finding that power again, like being able to take our power back in a situation where, yeah, because, when we're hurt or upset or angry, I mean, those are very powerless feelings for me anyway. It's just like,
Mhm.
I feel out of control, man. Like somebody pulled the rug out from under my feet, and just free falling and like being able to find, what it is that helps us to be able to build that bridge to take our power back, that's huge. I mean, that's like, probably one of the most empowering secrets to life, if you will, that there is like, okay, so I can't, control, this situation at all. And I love that you brought up the noise canceling headphones, hashtag marriage saver when you are married to a snorer. I found, and that was really bothering me in my marriage a few years back is, gosh, he just won't stop snoring. And I need my sleep. And, just kind of this back and forth. And I trained myself to sleep with noise canceling headphones on, which I know I'm sure will give me a brain tumor or something. That's another, like, yeah, I'm sorry about this, but truly, like, it works for me in that, I feel like I can do something about the situation that's not infringing on his life. And you know what? Hey, it worked. So
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. Yes.
yeah, taking those boundaries out too. I mean, I love that you mentioned boundaries, and I don't think, boundaries will ever get old. Somebody said to me the other day, "Oh, boundaries, yeah, that's such a buzzword or whatever." And I was like, "Oh, maybe it's a buzzword, but I think it's a buzzword because they're necessary, and difficult to maintain and, hard when you set a boundary and then somebody else, nope, they don't respect it. And then, like, what am I going to do with that? How can I still, care for myself and do what I need to do to, give myself love and compassion? And yeah,
Absolutely.
I think
Yes.
it's tough. Well, on that note, I have to say that, I mean, if you are listening to this and you are choosing to forgive, and of course, choosing to forgive, of course, doesn't mean like signing off on, somebody's behavior, but it's making that choice for you. And then it looks a little bit messy, that's okay. It doesn't feel good, but the beauty can be found in the mess, and in hindsight. And, um, some of these things just won't go away for us necessarily, maybe at the level that we're hoping. But who knows? I mean, I don't know at the end of the day what's good, for me to come into my life or to, I can start to trust my intuition, but then sometimes, things happen and I just, I need to consult my higher power. And for me, that looks like, figuring out what is it? What is this within the serenity prayer, that I can change, and what are the things that I can't. And sometimes it's not how I want to feel, but feelings, they pass, right? Like, it's why they're emotions, right? Is that they're in motion. But Heidi, I just want to thank you so much. Like, this has filled my soul. This conversation has truly filled my soul. And um, I just want to thank you for coming on and for sharing your wisdom. And I just wish you all the best, girl.
This was
Love you.
awesome. And I think I just like to leave everybody with going back to the really, I think, a foundational part of this conversation and part of our processes of forgiving is asking ourselves, what is my definition of forgiveness?
Mm,
And like really sitting with that. What is it? What am I expecting of myself? What do I want to extend to another person, even if they never hear about it? Even if I never speak it, it's just in my own heart. What is it? Because then we can also get to the bottom of, oh, I was expecting reconciliation. And, ooh,
mm,
actually, I don't even think I want reconciliation. That wouldn't be very healthy right now. Or whatever the thing, okay, yes, grief can coexist, but what what is your working messy definition of forgiveness? I think that's just kind of a challenge and a question I'd like to leave for the listeners, because I think it's so important to know with clarity what it is we're asking of ourselves when we're asking ourselves to do the very hard, humbling, difficult, grief filled work of forgiveness. What exactly are we asking ourselves to do? And so I think we each can come up with our own sort of working definition of forgiveness, but I think it's really important to do that.
I am so glad you said that. That's such a beautiful call to action. And what's funny is I'm really glad you said that before we wrap this up officially and let it go, because a couple times while you were speaking, I was like, oh, shoot, what is Heidi's definition? And I don't know if you're not comfortable sharing it, that's totally fine. But if you're comfortable sharing it, would you mind letting us
Yeah,
know?
I totally will. Okay, so it's got 4 parts and so number 1, it's to decide that a person who has harmed me does not owe me anything.
Mm, that's
Number
so good.
2, to understand intellectually and at the heart level that they don't have it to give, whatever it is. It
Mm,
could be um empathy or compassion for the pain that they've caused. It that they just do not have could be awareness or understanding of what my experience was. The it they don't have could be awareness of how to make amends because most people don't.
yeah.
And I think sometimes those of us that have been through the 12 steps or other maybe
Mhm.
similar kind of spiritual practices, we might take that for granted that we've actually been sort of taught what does this look like to look at what we've done and then make amends. Some people just don't have awareness about that. And then finally, what came up for me that what they may just not have to give is the humility to make amends.
Mm,
Whew. I mean, it takes some humility. It is humbling to make amends and just not everybody maybe has that. And so whatever I'd like to receive from them, I'm just believing sincerely that they simply do not have it to give. So I'm going to choose to release them of a debt they really cannot pay. Like I could
mm,
tell you all day long, you owe me $9 billion, but if you don't have $9 billion, it doesn't matter how strongly I feel that you owe me $9 billion if you just don't have it. So the first one was deciding that a person who has harmed me doesn't owe me anything. And number 2 just kind of goes with that because whatever whatever it is that I'm wanting, they don't have it to give, whatever it is. Um, the third thing is that in the process of forgiveness, I'm going to honor the grief and sadness and disappointment that I feel. And I'm
mm,
going to own my power to heal, knowing that they cannot give that to me, which I sometimes I think deep down think, oh, an amends or an apology, them understanding or something is going to kind of give me the healing that I need. But really, like, that's my responsibility and in my
mhm,
power to really own my healing. And then, of course, I have to honor my own grief, whether or not they
mhm,
ever acknowledge it. So that's the third one. And then lastly, I like this one. I heard this one on a podcast, I think by been listening and reading to a lot by a guy named Chuck DeGroat. He wrote a book that's kind of a big deal right now in the Christian world called When Narcissism Comes to Church.
mm,
And he talking about forgiveness and things like that. And so I kind of got this one from something he said that my forgiveness process I want it to include humbly hoping that one day they will become aware and willing to make amends so that there can be reconciliation on a healthy and appropriate level. So notice all those other things are not contingent, like nothing's contingent on that,
mm,
but it's just like living in that tension of my own grief, choosing to let go of a debt they really can't pay. And then also, I'd like to hold hope, not expectation, but a healthy level of hope that one day they will have an awareness and they will be humble enough to make amends so that there can be like a real reconciliation where they on some level feel safe again, even if it's just as an acquaintance or something. But just so there won't be that unresolved yuck, there. So those are kind of, it's a little lengthy, but those are kind of my 4 parts that I have so far as my working definition of forgiveness that I think is reasonable. I don't think there's anything in there that's just like, like the reconciliation thing. Oh, reconciliation is the same as forgiveness. There's nothing in there that's like I've weeded all that out. So
Mhm.
that's really helpful. And I'm going through a situation right now where some stuff came up and I realized, oh, whoa, after the anger, after the self-righteousness, under there for sure was sadness and grief. And so I'm really, this is like the process that I'm kind of working through, and
Mhm.
stay tuned. I guess I'll let you know if it air quote worked. But I think that's most of our conversation tonight is there's not that super, legalistic measurement of it worked, right?
Right.
Or not a hard timeline on when we get to say it worked, because it's a process.
Oh, okay. So like basically you saved the best for last. That was amazing. I love your definition. And the whole the part about I just have to comment on it too is the basically releasing somebody from the obligation. I'm paraphrasing, but of what what they're not capable of giving, what they can't give, don't have it, don't know, whatever, just to, just be like, oh, they can't give me what they don't have, what they're
Right.
unaware of. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's so liberating.
Yeah.
So
Doesn't that
free.
feel light? Right. Like
Yeah.
it feels lighter. Like, oh, they just don't have it. Oh,
Hmm. 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 I don't want to end too soon. If there's anything else that needs to be said, I'll give us like 10 seconds to just kind of like think of anything else.
I think that's it. And maybe if my definition helps anybody else, feel free to use that for yourself and rework it or whatever. But I would really, it's easy to consume content. It's harder to sit down with our journals or however, maybe it's go for a run in process or whatever. It's harder to really like do the work and go, okay, I'm going to sit down for 30 minutes or whatever. And I'm going to really think about what is my definition of forgiveness? Like, what am I asking of myself when I'm asking myself to forgive something hurtful? So
Mm,
I think that would be how I'd like to maybe close, is just to really encourage you. If you're struggling with this, don't, don't take the easy way out of just kind of consuming content. But like, if you'll dig in a little bit deeper, oh man, it's like it's the difference between slapping a Band-Aid on something and maybe like
mm,
experiencing the surgery that's going to
mhm.
really, start your healing process. So don't be
Mm.
afraid to get in there and really, really, yeah, explore that.
Heidi, this is like powerful. It's going to help so many. And I so appreciate your time and your wisdom on this and your sharing. I'm blown away. It's going to be a conversation that I'm going to digest for a few days over and over. And thank you. It was literally an honor having you on. What a pleasure. What a gift. Thank you.
This was awesome. I loved it. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.